on, Frenchie. What's going on, Snorty McSnorterson? Hello.
We could probably start at the beginning. Tell us who you are.
I'm Marcel Cacdac, live sound engineer, living in San Francisco. I got my start back in 1997. Let's see, I was working at a sound company in Emeryville in the Bay Area, and we got the account for the B.B. King Blues Festival in '98, and the owner asked me if I wanted to go out on tour, and I was like, yes indeed, I definitely want to go out on tour. So my first tour was mixing B.B. King, Dr. John, Jimmy Vaughn, Storyville, Susan Tedeschi. It was a whole traveling festival.
Wow. And you'd only been doing sound how long at that point?
A year.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
And you were actually doing, were you doing front of house or monitors? What were you doing?
I was doing monitors.
Okay.
Yeah. And worked at that company till, I guess, like 99, 2000. Started my own company in the Bay Area doing special events, weddings, and stuff like that. And continued to tour and just kept, it's funny, my first tour was in a bus, and then after that I went to the van and trailer, so I went a little backward.
Yeah.
But I gotta say, touring in a van and trailer is not only character building, but I feel like every touring individual needs to be in a van and trailer tour.
Yeah.
Needs to do one, at least once in their lifetime. Because you learn so much that you just don't get when you're in the bus.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
You know?
Yeah, and I think, and if you start out doing van and trailer tours like I did, then when you get to where you're doing a bus and you're doing fly-in gigs and things like that,
Yeah.
like you appreciate it so much more.
Oh, totally.
Like you're like, wow, okay, like this is a whole different level of it's just like that. I have seen the reverse though. I have seen where people start out with buses and whatever, and then like it's really difficult for them to transition.
Oh yeah.
To van and trailer.
Yeah, exactly.
They're a little bit spoiled, you know, a little bit
spoiled.
entitled.
You're traveling around, you know, mixing arenas, and that's your start. It's hard to go to the van.
And now you have to. And now you're like you're not only doing the job and mixing, but you're also driving the van all day.
Yep.
And everything, and you're like, holy shit! Like my days got like way longer. I'm doing a lot more work, you know, for like less money and everything. And yeah, for sure. But how did you? So you started out by working with a sound company, but how did you get into doing that sound company job in the first place? Like what did you have like some kind of history in like was this like right out of high school or?
No, I had gone to a few colleges, just bounced around, didn't stay at any colleges for too long. Ended up going to Full Sail.
Oh, okay.
And
was this, wait, so in the 90s, is this back when because they were just in Florida at the time, right?
Yeah, it was in Florida. And,
but eventually, didn't they have other campuses in like New York or maybe some other places? Or am I wrong?
I don't think so, but okay. I don't know. So yeah, I graduated there and moved to California, and one of my classmates called me. I was living in my car. It was me and my roommate and my snake. I had a red-tailed boa. We were all living in my car, in my Subaru wagon.
Holy shit.
And a friend of mine from Full Sail calls me up and he was like, hey, I got a job for you. Come down to this sound company and interview. And they hired me on the spot.
But you're a Bay Area native?
No, I grew up in Indiana.
Oh, okay, so then you came out. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so Indiana to Florida, back to Illinois, back down to Florida, just bounced around until I landed in San Francisco.
Okay. And what year did you land here?
97.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you went to Full Sail, so back then, did they have a dedicated live sound program, or was it more studio?
It was mainly studio stuff, but they did have a live sound program. We had a venue, had a couple of consoles, but you know, we weren't packing trucks, we weren't building racks, you know, we weren't doing that kind of stuff. It was a lot of classroom stuff, and then bands would come in and we'd mix them.
Okay.
Yeah.
How long was that? Like a 1-year program?
13-month program.
Okay.
And then you walk away with a
certification.
A specialized associates.
Okay.
In recording arts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Very cool. Wow. That's wild that you landed like a big tour, like right into the beginning of it.
Right off the bat. So super lucky.
Now, when you went back to van and trailer stuff, was it like really small van and trailer stuff, or was it more like there's still a lot of van and trailer bands that are like might be doing like 500 cap rooms as opposed to like playing in a bar on the floor.
It was about 500 to 600 cap. You know, kind of bars, small venues. You know.
Yeah.
And that was I think the next tour after that was. After BB King was with JGB, the Jerry Garcia band, without Jerry, of course, because he had died in 1995.
Okay.
But it was Melvin Seals, the organ player for Jerry. Actually, it was a lot of the same band members as Jerry band, and we were just out there playing Jerry songs, or the songs that Jerry played.
And do you have a musical background? Like, do you play an instrument growing up and stuff like that?
I didn't play an instrument growing up. I was a singer in a bunch of bands growing up, junior high and high school. Okay. My family's very musical. Everybody sings. We're Filipino, so everybody sings.
Okay.
It's all about the karaoke, you know that.
Okay.
But when the realization that struck me that I wasn't going to be a rock star, I knew I had to find something else.
Yeah. Before you went to Full Sail, what kind of stuff were you doing in college? Were you just like trying to like figure out like what kind of career path you wanted to be on, or?
Yeah, totally. I originally was going to go into sports medicine. I went to Jacksonville University.
Okay.
Played tennis there. It's a D1 college. And then that didn't work out. Moved back to the Midwest. Went to, I don't remember the name of the college, some community college. And then went back down to Florida and met a guy that I knew from Jacksonville. And he was like, hey, you gotta come check this place out. I'm going to school at this place. It's right up your alley. He's like, I know you're into music and you should just check it out. They got a recording program and whatever. And so I met him. I had no idea what this place was, and it ended up being Full Sail. But yeah, Full Sail was good. It was the studio maintenance class was where I learned the most stuff. How to read schematics.
Okay.
How to open up, how not to be scared and open up pieces of gear and dissect what's going on, you know?
Well, in '99, you probably still, even on the, that's the kind of the infancy of the digital recording, so you probably still learned how to like calibrate tape machines and that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, I learned tape machines, Callan, and you know, at the sound company I cut my teeth on analog boards. So I saw the whole transition from analog to digital.
Yeah.
Which was crazy. There was so many guys that tried to hold on for their dear lives to their analog consoles, and they got left behind like dinosaurs.
Yeah.
That's the thing about our business. You have to really keep up with the technology.
Yeah.
You know, we went from being roadies to technicians, and that's a really important distinction.
Yeah.
You know, like you really have to be on top of it.
Yeah, I haven't kept up at all because I've kept like the one same home gig with Bottom of the Hill, and we're still analog there.
Right.
Not like out of insistence of like, it's funny because when people come in, they'll be like, oh man, you're a diehard, man. You're still fucking analog. Like you must be hardcore. I'm like, dude, a fucking really good digital board would make my life so much easier.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of like saving all the sound checks and everything else, and like speeding up my workflow. But, you know, it's all comes down to like the budget and like what we can afford to do in a small venue like that. And it's like, unless we were going to get like a really, really good, at least mid-tier digital console that would be like impressive enough to the caliber of like up and coming bands that are coming through and selling out a place like Bottom of the Hill that's like a legacy venue.
Yeah.
I don't want to be just like another venue where you go in and there's like a banged up old X32 in there. Even though I've probably mixed 1,000 shows in other venues and for other production companies on an M32 or an X32 over the years, and like I can get around really fast on those boards and I totally get it. And so it's not like I'm shitting on those or anything like that. I understand why it's like ubiquitous or whatever, but it's the novelty value of us still being analog that when visiting engineers come in, which isn't very often, but if on the occasions where you have a guest engineer come in, they look at the board and they go, oh my God, I learned on this PM 3500 at my church gig back in like 2001. And they're like, oh, this is going to be so much fun. And it's like they're really like excited about it.
Right.
It's not as like ho-hum as like, oh, okay, we got another bottom of the line Soundcraft board or a bottom of the line Behringer board or whatever. It's like the same thing that we see in every venue every night.
Right.
You know?
He's got a 3500 in there?
Yeah. The people at the Hilton Hotel, it's LORDE. It had been sitting in a road case in a hallway for a couple years. They had put in a whole new system, and they've got this like, 52 channel PM 3500 that was installed in there, and it was sat in there from like something like they had it in the venue or in the ballroom at the Hilton Hotel in SF from like 2001 to like 2016 or something like that. I think we did more shows on it in the first year we had it than they did in the 15 years that they had it, because they would like literally pull it out and use it like once a month, so it was like in pristine condition. It was like totally perfect. And the old PM 3000 that we had was just falling apart, and you couldn't get parts anywhere.
Right.
It's like you'd have to cannibalize channel strips off of eBay.
Wasn't there Allen and Heath in there?
There was for a little while. The Allen and Heath was new when I started there in 2006. I started in August, and I think they got it at the beginning of the year. So it was only like maybe 7 months old or something when I started working there.
Right.
And within about 5 years, it started having issues. And around that same time, Allen and Heath had changed their like repair policy. They would no longer provide or sell schematics to end users. They revised their whole service policy. You had to go to an authorized Allen and Heath service center. You had to go to one of their dealers to get it fixed.
Yeah.
And it was going to cost, and it was just like a GL 2800, or no, a GL 3200. And it was going to be so expensive just to repair the couple channels that were having issues that it was like, we should just start shopping for another board.
Right.
And because of that, I was like, I'd like to shop for something that's like modular, so that I can try and at least attempt the repairs on it myself. So it's like, let's start looking for like a PM 3000 or an old Crest Century or something like that, you know.
Right.
So then we ended up getting this PM 3000, and we had that in there for 2011 until about 2018 or whatever. But yeah, after about 7 or 8 years, that thing was just like we were down to like 30 of the 40 channels were working, and then of those 30, there were some where it was like the pots were getting all scratchy, and you couldn't just spray them out, you know, and like it was just getting to be a maintenance nightmare. And then we were offered this free PM 3500 that was in pristine condition. I was like, hell yeah, like perfect drop-in replacement, you know. I gotta like keep trying to get my ears to unplug on these mountains.
Yeah, my ears are
crazy.
My ears are a wreck right now.
It's one thing if they both go out kind of like in an even manner, but it's like when one's more clogged than the other.
Yeah.
And it's like then your hearing's all off, and I'm like worried about, like, sometimes I do that thing where, like, you know, you hold your nose and you blow or whatever to get it to like pressure to like equalize, and then sometimes I do that and I'll be like, whoa, like I'll get like dizzy. Like I can't be doing that while I'm driving. Like, it's not good. Jeopardize all of our lives. But so that's cool. That's how you got started. And then like early on when you were touring that much, like how many months out of the year were you touring?
Back then, I was touring, I would say, about 6 months out of the year.
Okay.
So about half the year. Not all at once, you know.
Yeah.
You know, a month here, a month there, a few weeks here, a few weeks there. And then in, let's see, I'm trying to think of who I toured with. I went from Jerry Garcia band to Jerry Cantrell. And I was mixing in front of house for Jerry Cantrell in 2001. And I can't remember who I toured with after that. But yeah, I started ramping up and started touring at least 7 months out of the year.
Okay. When did you first start doing international tours? Like, when's the first time, like, was there a time where you'd like, when you're like, oh, like I'm going to like countries I've never been to before, and like stuff like where you're like, oh, I never thought I'd be doing this, you know?
Right. When did that start happening? Was that with Secret Machines? I did some international touring with Cake. And I toured with Bobby Mack on Cake.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What year was that?
Like 2004-ish.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had a funny thing that happened with Bobby Mack was in what was it, 90? I think it was like 98. I was supposed to go out to be like a stage tech. This was actually right before Bobby Mack. So this was when their original sound guy, this guy Will Cotter, that I knew.
Oh, I know Will.
From the Sacramento area, because I grew up in Davis. And so then I was living on the East Coast around the time that they blew up. And so Will was their guy that was touring with them for a while.
Will's such a nice guy.
And they were going to bring me in as like their first time they were going to hire like a roadie or whatever, have like a stage tech or something.
Yeah.
So I was going to go in and do that. And it was this whole weird thing where I was out in Chicago helping a friend who was producing a record for a band. It was part of that whole like Lookout and Fat Records and all that kind of stuff that was happening at that time. And so he asked me to come out to Chicago and help him, you know, just like kind of like do sort of like just changing guitar strings and tuning drum heads and just help this band that he was producing, help them out in the studio with like whatever I could do or whatever. And I was supposed to go from there to fly up to Minneapolis or something to start this like 3-week tour or whatever with Cake. And then it was going to end in like Florida or something, and then they're supposed to fly me home to Richmond, Virginia from that.
Right.
Well, something happened. There was like some big fight in the band or something, and somebody got kicked out of the band or somebody quit or whatever. It's like this big thing happened, like literally like a week before the tour was going to start. So I'm in Chicago, but I live in Richmond, Virginia, and and it was like they had the first time they had like a manager or something, and this woman had like never managed a band before, didn't really know what was going on, and so it was just like it was a total mess. And at any rate, and I'll probably cut all this stuff out because I don't want to be like shitting on people or whatever. Like if I publish this interview, But so then I was like, it was just like a really weird thing where I had this conversation with her. I was like, well, okay, like, so the studio thing is done, and instead of flying up to Minneapolis in a few days to start this tour, I was like, can you get me a new ticket back to Richmond, Virginia or whatever? And she was kind of like, not to say that she was like, that's not our problem, but it was something kind of weird, and I was like, and by the way, like, you got to pay me for at least 50% of what you're going to owe me for the tour.
Right.
And she was like aghast. She was like, you don't know anything about the touring world or how this stuff works, do you? She's like, we're facing tens of thousands of dollars in cancellation fees from all the venues that we're canceling on short notice. And this could bankrupt the band and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, I'm one of those cancellation fees. Yeah. I'm like, I've been doing this for a living the last few years. You cancel a tour on me on 4 days notice. I'm like, I can't just go get another tour.
Right.
Because we planned this like 3 months ago. Like my calendar's already blocked out. I've already turned away other things.
Right.
And I was like, so you owe me at least a 50% deposit on this tour.
That's standard.
And she was like completely offended. And then Will had to get on the phone and be like, hey, look, like, I know you're new to managing bands and whatever, and I'm really sorry and whatever, but like, Will, and so they, like, a couple days later, they fucking FedExed me like a check and a plane ticket to Richmond, Virginia, and whatever, but I like, never heard from them again. And I was kind of like, okay, well, whatever, like, fuck them, you know? Like, I was like, but that was in like 97 or 98. It was after I'd already done a tour with Bobby Mack, and I knew him at that point, and then I knew that he got on board with them at some point later on. But yeah, that was I think in '98, and it was basically like the only crew would have been like me and Will would have been the two people on it, you know what I mean? But they were one of those bands that like they had a hit and they blew up like really rapidly, like overnight in like that point in like 97 or 98.
Yeah.
And so I think that was kind of indicative of like a lot of things going on in that camp of people at that time that was kind of chaotic and people didn't know what they were doing and whatever. So we're 10 minutes out from the first drop of dogs. Let me just send them a quick message. Get back on the chat here. 10 minutes to the stop in Medford. Little break, refueled, stopped in Grants Pass, dropped off 6 dogs that are going out to South Coast Humane, and shoveled down some snacks, refreshed our drinks. Now we can talk about touring again. So from the very beginning, like pretty early on, you've been able to hop back and forth between front of house and monitors.
That's one thing that I was fortunate enough to get was calls for front of house and for monitors. There was a time there where I was only getting calls for monitors, and I was wanting to be at front of house more, and then I slowly transitioned into doing more front of house. But yeah, I've done my fair share of both ends of the snake.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a relatively common trajectory when people are starting off like on the beginning rungs of the ladder,
Yeah.
where it's like, you know, you're in a small place where you're doing like me at bottom of the hill, like you're doing front of house and monitors from one board.
Yep.
You know, so you're doing it from the same console. And then as you graduate up to where you start working for bigger production companies or working in bigger venues, a lot of times if it's a place that has a dedicated monitor console, they'll start you out on monitors.
Yep.
A lot of times they'll put people in at monitors before they'll put them move them out to front of house. And I had never really gone that route because I was just working at bottom of the hill where I'm doing both. But then when I was touring, that quickly got to where I was just a front of house person.
Right.
So I never really actually cut my teeth as a monitor engineer, and I had a couple really negative experiences as a monitor engineer on just a couple random freelance gigs.
Yeah.
Where I was just like, holy shit, I was like terrified. I was like, I don't ever want to do monitors ever again, you know? And
not for the faint of heart.
no, it's not. And I think also too, it's just, I also realized that for my personality type, because like there are some people who like once they've had a taste of each, they're like, oh, I love doing monitors.
Yeah.
I love being like interacting directly with the band.
Yeah.
Like I'm right there on the side of the stage. Like I put their packs on, or I bring out their monitors with them, or whatever. And they're like, it's a very hands-on thing, you know. And like, so for them, the customer or the client is the actual performers.
Right.
And for me, the customer or the client who I'm trying to like influence and like everything is like just, you know, the audience.
Right.
And I find that for myself as like a very like introverted person, I just, it's like way easier for me to focus on one thing,
Yeah.
like one big mix. And I find monitors kind of nerve-wracking because I'm like constantly like looking at everybody on the stage waiting for any kind of hand signal
Yep.
for something to change.
Yep.
And it's like just totally nerve-wracking. And for some people that's just like totally part of their workflow. They're just kind of like, they see something, they're like, cool, got it, boom, and they just like do it. And you know, and I just like, man, I can't do it. It's like if I was doing front of house for like an hour,
Yeah.
versus doing monitors for an hour, monitors I would walk away physically exhausted
Yep.
because my whole body would have been tense the whole time, like worrying about like all the different mixes going on the stage. I just like, I'm not cut out for it, you know.
I always say that mixing monitors is 10% technology and 90% psychology.
Yeah.
You know. Cool thing about monitors though is that you have the opportunity to create a deeper rapport with the artist.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You have to get into their heads and you have to learn how they hear things. So if you got 7 guys on stage, you've got 7 mixes that all have a different philosophy.
Right.
But you have to synthesize all of those different philosophies into meld with your own so that you can translate what they're trying to achieve.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I totally agree with that. I mean, I would say what you said about monitors and like, you know, 10%, you know, technology and technique and skill and 90% psychology. I think that just applies to live sound in general.
Yeah.
You know, in a pretty big way. Well, maybe less so when you are at the level where you're playing big enough places where front of house is a bit more removed from the actual band.
Yeah.
But absolutely, when you're at like the smaller capacity clubs where they don't have a separate monitor board and you're kind of doing everything.
Well, I mean, it applies to front of house in that the psychology part is the audience. Because what we do out at front of house is basically mind control. We're telling them what they want to hear.
Yeah, we're dictating the experience.
Dictating the entire experience. For better or worse.
Yeah, yeah, for better or worse, depending on who's at the helm, and like, you know, yeah. I got to do the improvised. I got that gap in the window shade.
Oh yeah.
So I got to do the improvised fast food bag to keep keep the side of my head from getting burned off. I burn really easily, and like my ears will be all cooked. So there we go. Thank you, brown paper bag from Burger King. I do think that it's important for a person to have a philosophy about how they do sound.
Yep.
And what they want to achieve on the audience's behalf, or on the performer's behalf. And I do think that you have to be tuned into psychology. You really do have to understand a lot about psychology, and like having a good bedside manner is a huge thing. It's a really big deal, because I definitely find, and people's, performers in particular, their expectations change at different levels of experience. But I do find that in this sort of beginning, when all of us are on the lower rungs, when the musicians are maybe not quite as experienced and they haven't experienced a certain thing where they're kind of like, oh, I have to be at that level all the time, where it's like, okay, that's where I really want to be.
Yeah.
And when an engineer doesn't have as much experience, my observation has been over the years that bands are way more, when it comes to the psychology thing, bands are way more lenient and forgiving of someone who doesn't have as much skill and technique, or they're confined to not working with the best tools, if they are sincerely like trying their best. And really and they're like cool and a nice person to get along with.
Right.
I think most musicians and performers at a certain strata would rather have that experience than the opposite extreme, where someone's really good at sound but they're an insufferable asshole.
Yeah.
It's like, so with the psychology thing, it really is important to like be able to just get along with people and like try your best and be helpful to them. Because even if you are super skilled and you're kind of a dickhead, like, your career's not likely to go very far. At least the nice person can always get better.
Right.
Whereas the really skilled person may not ever get nicer.
Right.
They might just always be an insufferable asshole. Now, aside from the touring stuff, with being able to like move pretty early on between monitors in front of house, when you had stepped back to where you'd said you'd like done bus tours and like really large scale arena stuff very first, like right out of the gate.
Yeah.
And then you kind of got the experience of doing van and trailer stuff afterwards.
Yeah.
When you were doing the van and trailer stuff, were you also like wearing multiple hats, where you're like also like, front of house / TM or front of house van driver?
I did a lot of driving. I did TM / front of house. I did front of house and merch on a tour. Because the budgets really aren't there at the club level to be able to pay multiple people for multiple positions.
Yeah.
That really doesn't start happening until you're in the theater.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you can bring in like a full-time TM.
Right. Yeah, wearing a lot of hats. That was not, I don't want to go back to that.
Yeah, neither do I. It's another reason that I walked away from touring when I did, because it was sort of like, things were really upside down in that era around 2010, 11, 12, where like, at that point it was like, okay, Walmart and Best Buy are no longer going to carry CDs. And so then it was like, a lot of revenue streams were drying up for bands, and a lot of bands hadn't adjusted to that yet, and management companies didn't know what to do with like pirated music. And it was like, by 2010, like it was just assumed that you had to give away your music for free.
Right.
You know, and so then everybody's business model was like turned upside down, and it was a weird time because, you know, I started doing sound in 2005, and then like by 2010 or 11, I've got it on my resume that I'm out doing, not headliners, but I'm doing like all these like support acts on like 10,000, 20,000 seat arena tours.
Right.
So I've got the resume where I'm totally qualified to do that, but I potentially stood to make more money with the salaries that people were getting at that period. I could stay home and work at Bottom of the Hill 5 nights a week and make more money than on the road.
Really?
And I was like begging to get like $1,500 a week.
Whoa.
To mix for 20,000 people a night as like a dedicated full-on just, you know, front of house engineer.
Right.
And I was seeing, well, at the time I was like on the BobNet news group or email group thing.
Yeah.
And I think it was in summer of 2011, I was seeing like offers going out saying, newly signed major label band doing support on a major arena tour. This, you know, $700 a week TM front of house on a bus tour.
What?
$700 a week, like $100 a day. These were actual real offers that were going out in like 2011. And I was just like, you know what? Like, I don't need to be doing this anymore. I was just like, it was such a struggle to get on tours that where anybody was getting paid anything decent. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, I could stay home and work like 4 or 5 nights a week at a club gig and make more money than on tours where they're where they need someone. And I was just like, yeah, this is.
Yeah, but I wonder who they got for that tour.
Well, and that's
somebody
the thing.
Who wasn't qualified. That's for
That's
sure.
the thing, is that sometimes I would actually hear stories from people who were still out, and they're like, oh yeah, they burned through like 3 front of house people in the first 2 weeks or whatever, you know,
Right,
or they burned through this many monitor engineers like in a couple weeks or whatever, because it was just a shit show. It was a complete disaster, you know. But yeah, that was just like a super weird time, and I just kind of had to get out because I was like, one, it's hard enough for me to even get money to live in the Bay Area,
Right.
off of being a front of house engineer. And now I'm seeing the budgets are so badly cut that they want me to go back to wearing multiple hats, you know, front of house / production manager or whatever.
Right.
And I was just like, this doesn't make any fucking sense. Like, And then it's crazy because then post-pandemic, all these years later, you know, after being off the road for 10 years, now I'm seeing job offers are like, you know, they need someone who's like practically entry level. People who aren't even qualified to do things that I did 15 years ago, and they're getting like $3,500 a week.
Right.
And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, that's insane. Like, and you know, if I wasn't doing the dog rescue stuff, I'd probably be out making a killing, like getting on the road and touring, because I'm certainly qualified to do it, but I'm not gonna like, I'm just not like, I'm very happy with how things are right now at home, but it's just like, yeah, that's what a major contrast in a span of about 10 years,
Right.
like happened from the time I got out to like coming back to the post-pandemic era was like, it's fucking bananas.
Yeah.
So what are you doing right now? I mean, in terms of just being like, so you said you haven't been out on tour for like a little over a year now?
Yep.
But you're able to. You have the flexibility to.
I have the flexibility to tour if something compelling comes calling. But yeah, so now I'm working at Sound Image in Hayward, behind a desk, no longer loading trucks. My body is thanking me for it.
Bet. Yeah.
I'm not humping 4-aught through the mud anymore. All positive things.
Yeah. Yeah, carrying around hundreds of pounds of feeder cable and all that shit.
Yeah.
Fuck.
I ain't trying to hump 4-aught anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, even like even though as much as I loved it, it was like I'd always come home from a tour with like just totally random bruises all over my body.
Oh yeah, cuts,
And
bruises.
like I'd be like, I don't even know where most of these bruises came from. And then later on I'd realize, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's right, because it's like every night when I pack the van and I have to get that one thing in there, I hit it with my hip to wedge that thing in there, and that's why I got this big fucking brown bruise on my hip or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
Or like every night when I have to get that one thing and like to fit in that one area or whatever, and I like pushing in there, and then I got like this. It's like where I'm like, but I'd come home and I'd be like, where did all this come from?
It's
and
just
it's like constant wear and tear.
It's just evidence of work.
Yeah. But I definitely don't get that when I'm just working at bottom of the hill.
Yeah.
I don't go home with like nicks and cuts all over my hands and forearms and bruises on my, like, all over my legs and my hips and all that stuff. If anything, it happens doing this stuff now. like,
Right.
Like trying to like unload this van and like moving all these crates around and stuff. I get a little bit banged up doing that sometimes, but so what would be compelling enough to get you to want to go out? Like, do you? I mean, you've probably done like so many different genres of music.
Yep.
That, you know, some people like they just stay like in a certain thing because it's like their scene or it's their thing.
Yeah.
And like all they do is they just do like metal bands, or they just do hardcore bands, or they just do
hip hop,
or whatever, or indie rock, or like, you know, some kind of thing. And
I've never been one to pigeonhole myself into a corner like that. I've been fortunate enough to get calls from all sorts of different artists, and I just think for me it would be a very dull and uninspiring life if all I did was mix one genre.
Yeah.
Year in and year out.
And if you're that person, it's probably the thing you actually listen to all the time as well. So
Right.
You're not even really hearing anything different, you know? Like in your leisure time when you're listening to music. You know? No, I definitely felt that, like, I felt very fortunate that without really, it wasn't even like a specific strategy or anything, but I went through like a few, I got to tour with a few different acts who did a different kind of thing, you know? And like I never toured with a reggae act, and I never toured with like a straight up country or anything like that, but
yeah, me either.
But it was like, you know, I did like a straight up like punk rock band, and then I did a band like, you know, the Bell Rays, which are like super unusual, weird fusion of like punk and soul.
Yeah.
You know, and then I've done singer-songwriter, like folk rock acoustic-y kind of stuff, and then I've done indie rock, and then I've done like newer, like electronic-based UK soul. Like I've toured with different acts that did different things, and that was always cool because every time I had to reorganize everything I thought about how to like bring it all together,
right,
and like craft a good mix and
right.
make it sound right, you know. So it was like a new learning curve every time.
Right, but that brings it back to why it's so important to have a philosophy. Because no matter what the genre is, you apply your philosophy to get the result that is needed for that client.
Right. Yeah, I think it's. I always want to just like convey I just like try to like hone in on what it is that they do, and just make it sound like that, only louder. you know, and like not put too much of an imprint of my own on it. Like there's techniques and there's things that I can do from song to song, but I don't want to just go in and be like, oh, well, the last band I worked with, this is how I got this great kick drum sound.
Right.
And now I just impose that on everybody.
Right.
And now everybody, like, I use the same mics. Like, in fact, I would like change out the mic packages a lot like when I would begin touring with a new band, because I'd be like, yeah, this just isn't giving me this, this thing that might have been this 421 that sounded fantastic on this guy's guitar cabinet on the last tour.
Right.
Maybe it's just not doing what I wanted to do.
Well, that's the thing. It's like it's mixing from habit versus mixing from philosophy.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get into mixing from habit because it such and such piece of gear worked for this band X, Y, and Z, but then you try to use it for band ABC, and maybe it will work, maybe it won't.
Yeah.
But if that's your go-to just because you've known it,
it's lazy,
like,
really.
It's lazy, and you don't grow as a mixer.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Yeah, once I had realized that a few years into touring, that I was like, that it was good for me, that every time I was a little bit uncomfortable at the beginning of tours and like at rehearsals.
That's where growth happens.
Because I was kind of like, I don't really know how to approach this. This is like really different from that last tour I did, the band I was with last year or whatever. And then, but then when I realized like how much that was serving me, like when you work at Bottom of the Hill, there is some variety of stuff that comes through there, but by and large, it's known as like the place where all the alternative rock bands of the 90s like cut their teeth. And so it's like, it's kind of like known historically as the loud rock club, like, and it's like, so it can be easy to sort of fall into that. But then like when I worked at Elbow Room for a year on the original one, like over on Valencia, I think it was.
Yeah.
When I worked over there for a year, like in the very beginning of when I was mixing, it was cool because I'd be doing like world music and like reggae or something one night, and then like straight up hardcore bands the next night, and then there'd be like some weird thing that had like a spoken word performer the next night, and there's like I was doing like a real variety of stuff in that year that I worked there, and it was cool because like I still only had like that mixing board, and I still only had that very limited mic package or whatever. So it was kind of like, okay, I got to make these things work and translate in a way that like actually conveys what they're doing, And so it was good. It was good to like be exposed to a whole bunch of different genres, even though I grew up on the Bottom of the Hill thing.
Right.
And I love that thing, and I love being part of it and doing it, and giving a certain experience to bands who are of those genres that typically play there and everything. But if that had only been the only thing I would ever had done, like I definitely wouldn't have. I mean, I would still be the same engineer that I was 15 years ago or 20 years ago. I guess it's good to be like kind of thrust into a situation where you sort of have to learn something new. And I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and I was saying like, sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is when you go out on tour with an artist who's pretty demanding, and that artist is like someone who, because they're the guitar player and they play wirelessly or whatever, like halfway into the sound check, they walk out to front of house while they're playing. And they're like listening to your mix, and they start like telling you things that they don't like or whatever, and then you're like, oh, okay, like I gotta rethink this, like, because I'm not hearing it the way they're hearing it, and then like, it's sort of like what you were saying about doing a monitor mix for people, but they're actually doing it as like a critique of front of house.
Right.
It can be uncomfortable, it can be really hard to do that, but sometimes it's like it forces you to reorganize your workflow and your approach and the way that you do things.
I love it when my artist comes out into the house. Sometimes I love it when I'm doing a virtual sound check and the band comes out and they all listen. Like, I love it. Just like, I want them to hear it.
You have to be confident in your work to do that.
I want them to see and hear what I'm doing. And I'm open to criticism. It's like critique me. Like, how can we make this better?
Yeah. Well, and you have to, if you're going to be at that point, you have to be comfortable enough to know that if they ask why something sounds the way it sounds, that you can defend your choice.
Right.
And not out of laziness, and not just go like, because everyone makes a Beta 91 inside of a kick drum sound like that. You know, like that's not going to be a good answer.
Right.
You know, like you need to be able to articulate a philosophy and like what you're going for and what your goal is and everything. Because even if it is something that they don't agree with, you know, or they want it to sound a different way, at least they know that you're trying and that you've put some thought into it and that you have some, you know, that you're aiming at something. You're not just like going through the motions.
Right, that it's intentional.
Yeah.
Unless it's way off base and they're like, that is so wrong.
It's just like, look, we don't need to sound like a pop punk band or whatever. We need to sound like this. Like we don't need our drums to sound that way, or we don't need our guitars to sound that way. Like, you know, but the likelihood of that happening is probably goes increasingly lower and lower the more you have a philosophy and the more you have something thought out.
Right.
Because you're probably just not going to be diverging so far off the path into some, you know, weird thing that's going to be just completely unpalatable to them, you know. What was so resonant, like, when the first time that you told me on the phone about the Roadie clinic, it was like, oh yeah, like that's they're on like a parallel trajectory about like wanting to like, let's start having like real honest conversations about mental health and the touring community.
Let's address it.
You know, because, you know, like we were saying off camera a few minutes ago, it's like, you know, it's the island of misfit toys, and it's like, you know, like the people that are drawn to end up in this industry is like, you know, it's a very self-selecting demographic that gets funneled into doing, you know, the stuff that we've done and the, you know, the stuff that you're still available to do. I mean, I've been off the road for a long time, but yeah, you get a lot of people from a lot of, you know, crazy backgrounds and people with pretty wild life stories, and a lot of times that what accompanies that is, you know, substance abuse problems and mental health issues, and you know, and then there's just like the ups and downs of like the touring schedules, and like, you know, like I think another thing too that people don't really understand is like, you know, you develop like a sense of community and sometimes even like a sense of family with the people that you're touring with. Totally. And then, okay, cool, tour's done. Next leg of the tour is like, you know, whatever, like, and then you just like suddenly like you're like ripped away from those people, you know, like, and suddenly it's like, oh, now you're just back home for 6 weeks or whatever, and you're waiting for the next thing to come up and start another tour again. And like, there's a lot of like really jagged sort of like just weird ups and downs that people can like emotionally experience when they're doing this kind of work. And
there's
takes a toll.
There's a lot of people. It does take its toll, and there's a lot of people who aren't equipped, don't have the tools and coping mechanisms to deal with those changes and those transitions. I always found it very difficult to transition from the road back home, but much easier to transition from home to the road.
Yeah.
Coming home was always really difficult for me.
Yeah.
And you know, you leave for 6, 8 weeks, whatever, 3 months, and you come back a different person.
Yeah, every single tour changes you.
You change because you are now a culmination of all those experiences that you had in that tour. And think about those experiences, just the shows alone, and all the hardships and challenges that you have to go through, and then all your days off and all the fun that you're having or trying to have, and all the places that you're seeing and all the things that you're doing and all the people that you meet, and you know, when you come back home, you have processed those things, you encompass those things, so you're not the same person that you were when you left. I always had a really difficult time coming home, and trying to be the person that my family needed me to be. It's really difficult. We worked it out. You know, it took some hard conversations, and you know, like just getting perspective and really looking at it and putting myself in their shoes and looking at, you know, I mean, I would come home and I'd be wacky, you know, just like high from the tour, you know, maybe I drank too much, and then I'm coming home drying out a little bit, you know what I mean? And you know, it was difficult. It was funny, my wife Stephanie, I came home one time and I was forgetting to, like, not pick up the kids, but I was forgetting to do things because I was so accustomed to having master tour or a day sheet or just somebody telling me what to do.
Yeah.
You need to eat breakfast at this time. This is what time we load in. This is lunch. This is sound check. This is show. Like, you're spoon-fed all the information when you're on tour. So when I came home, she started making me day sheets. And it worked. It was like, pick up your daughter, go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't forget to pick her up from practice or whatever.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah. I'd have these little day sheets on the kitchen counter in the morning, and it totally worked. It totally helped me.
Yeah, when we do these runs, like, Rebecca will send out the final PDF like the night before.
Yeah.
And she'll go, okay, here's the dogs, here's where all the drop-offs are and everything. And then I just like immediately start cutting and pasting into my calendar.
Right.
And like on my calendar on Outlook. And then I put in the addresses and everything. Because on the day of, I don't want to be like looking over the sheet. I just want to like look at my Outlook and go, okay, we just left the pilot at Weed at, you know, whatever, like at 4 o'clock. And like, okay, like my next thing is I'm going to that address in Medford and just hit it and then opens Google Maps and, you know, and just like, but I have to like build the day ahead of time.
Right.
Because I don't want to be like constantly like looking at the run chat that's happening in Messenger.
Right.
There might be someone who doesn't use Facebook Messenger, so they're chatting with me on text. Then I've got a PDF that has like the master sheet. And it's like, it's just too much, like, you know what I mean? It's like, I need all that info consolidated in, like you said, like a day sheet. I need it in one place,
right,
where I can just start my day and like that's my reference, you know. And so, I totally understand it.
You're self-TMing.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, it's the only way on days that are like this hectic when there's so much stuff to get done. Yeah, I think that's. I think also too that, you know, going to what you're saying about how it's easier to leave and it's harder to come home because there's still a lot of stuff that you, like, so many things happen so fast on tour that, like, that it really, like, even when it's like, even if you have a whole year touring cycle with the same people and the same crew members and the same band and whatever,
yeah,
every single tour is its own little pressure cooker.
Yeah.
Of like intense experiences and obstacles that people have to overcome together. And there's so many things that like, yeah, even though people would think, well, I've tried to explain to people, like literally every time you go out on a tour, like you come back a slightly different person.
Yeah.
And they don't understand, like, well, but you're just going back out with your same buddies that you were out with a month ago. Like, how is that any different? It's just like they don't really understand that it's like every time there's like these unique new set of challenges of like, you know, making it all happen. And so I think that like every time you come back, like you need a certain amount of downtime to just like process
and decompress
and like file everything away mentally and just sort of like put it all into perspective and kind of get a handle on it, because like maybe there's some things that didn't go well on that tour and that you need to kind of like regroup and rethink about like how you're going to address or tackle certain things on the next leg of the tour, like whatever the thing happens to be. And what's difficult about that I think, again, also people may not grasp is that when you talk about the funneling of who kind of naturally self-selects to end up in this industry, I think that you're going to tend, for people who all of us, our jobs are not, we're not front of stage, we're not on stage performing.
Yeah.
So you're going to have people who are creatively inclined, they want to be part of artistic and creative things, but they might lean more towards being introspective and sort of quiet and, you know, and more reserved or whatever, you know?
Right.
So they're a bit more introverted as an overall personality type.
Yep.
But you're in this sort of pressure cooker situation where you're working with a lot of other people. You're traveling in a confined space because you're either like flying to gigs or you're taking a bus or a van or whatever. And so you never really get a break from other people. So when you have a whole bunch of people that are introverts who are forced almost into like a slightly more extroverted role in a way.
Yeah.
It's like when you finally come home, you're just like, oh, I just want fucking peace and quiet. Like I just need to like turn my brain off for a little bit, you know. And that's a really, really hard, like you said, it's way harder to come home than it is to like leave and go back and start the next big adventure.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's the fact that so many of us are naturally more introverted. You know.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And then we have these like really intense shared experiences that we're forced into, you know. I think that there's been a few tours where I had the luxury of extending, at the end of the tour, I had the luxury of extending my stay by a day or two before I came home, and I found that very helpful.
Yeah,
because I could just have some peace and alone time, some me time before I, you know, and gathered myself together before I go back to my family.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and when you told me about what the Roadie clinic is doing and the fact that they're like building out a facility,
right,
and that they have a place where like if a person's really having a crisis and needs to like take a break or get off of a tour, or if a person needs a place, an interim stop where they can go somewhere and get help, like not just staying in a hotel room for a couple extra days and then going home, but going somewhere where they can have like, there's like 12-step meetings available, and there's like, you know, there's like counseling available, and it's like, that's incredible. It's absolutely incredible that there's, you know, something like that that's geared towards someone who, you know, again, like might be just not in the right frame of mind and like really needs that buffer zone before they actually have to go home and interact with their family, and, you know, or whatever. Or maybe they don't go home with family at all, and maybe that's part of the problem, is that they, you know, maybe they're like, don't want to go home and just be like alone or whatever, you know, because then they know that maybe they'll start drinking too much or something, you know, and they just need to like find some way to buffer that, you know, in between the days of bus, and you always wonder if that's a band. Well, that's more of an RV.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of things there that are not obvious to people that are outside of the industry, which is why, against the backdrop of, you know, facilitating dog rescue and doing all this kind of stuff, which is its own like emotional like reward and everything. It's like it's its own good thing to be doing.
Right.
But to also like be able to make this like, okay, like let's get touring people in the van, and let's talk about touring, let's talk about the challenges and whatever, so that like these conversations can be out there on YouTube or on Facebook or whatever, and it's like in the ether, and it's like people can find that stuff, and you know, because there's always new people coming into the industry, and like you don't always necessarily have like a mentor to kind of like explain to you like, hey, there's going to be some real like challenges here. And I don't mean like the challenges of like, you know, oh, tomorrow you're going to be in a venue with wacky electrical issues or whatever.
Right.
I mean like the challenges of like, it's such a all-encompassing lifestyle, and there's this sort of like forced intimacy of like you're living in confined quarters with all these people, and like in a van and a bus and sharing hotel rooms and stuff. and like, you know, there's just a lot of just really intense emotional stuff that happens.
It's refined trauma bonding.
Yeah, yeah. There was in the documentary about Pat Spurgeon from Rogue Wave, the documentary about his kidney transplant.
Yeah.
There's a great scene where they're interviewing all these different performers that came through, and I think it was at the Independent. They were doing a fundraiser benefit thing for him, and it was Ben Gibbard from Death Cab. They're talking to him, and he's talking about it. He refers to touring as he says, you know, like the bonds that you share with people when you've toured with them. As he said, it's like war buddy. It's like they become like your war buddies without the violence.
Right.
Hopefully, without the violence. You know, but it is. It's kind of like that. You come back with this like sort of bunker mentality or like a foxhole mentality of like you know, like you feel like you've been out there in the trenches, like, you know, and you come back with these bonds with people that you know, it's like war buddies without the violence. You know, is a pretty good way of encapsulating it.
Well, Ryan George over at This Tour Life and his associates, when they put out that that questionnaire that right at the start of the pandemic, it was the questionnaire that was sent out to all touring individuals, and basically like asking, do you ever feel depressed? Do you feel anxiety? Do you have substance issues? You know, and asking about their mental health and well-being. I mean, the stats that came back were staggering, and it really showed how much help we need in the touring industry. But there had up to that point there hadn't been any research done, and the closest research that they could find that was parallel to what we experience on the road, the closest research that they could find was, guess, the military.
Right.
You know, and because you know the military spent millions of dollars researching, you know, well-being of their soldiers. But I found that to be really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, because they're kind of, you know, it's such an unusual fringe community, you know. It's like that people who are out touring for a living and doing that. It's I mean, there's a sort of glamorizing of it, and there's like a certain coolness factor, of course, you know, that makes it look really romantic and glamorous and exciting and everything.
Right.
But it can also be its own weird bubble that insulates you from not only a kind of like reality in a way, but also insulates you from, or it sort of cuts you off in some ways from being able to like really get help, you know?
Right.
And I think too, a lot of people that are experiencing those problems, like, you know, a lot of people like don't really have another thing that they're going to fall back on.
Right.
And so it's such a lifestyle, and touring is like the first, I'd say the first year and a half after I decided to get off the road was like legitimate identity crisis. Like,
Yep.
It was legitimately like, if I'm not out touring with bands and doing this amazing, cool, exciting thing, like, I don't, like
who am I?
Who am I? Like, what's my next phase of my life? Like, what am I going to do next? And I mean, it was like that first year to year and a half, I was like massively depressed and really, really struggling to figure out, like, you know, like, I knew my time had come where I was like, there's things I want, other things I want to do that I'm not going to be able to do if I keep touring.
Yeah.
And there were like financial reasons and other things in that era of the touring industry that made the decision relatively easy for me to say, okay, it's time for me to like move and start like doing a new thing. I don't really know exactly what that thing was, and yeah, so much of a person's identity can get tied up in the touring stuff that like, you can see where if someone's having a crisis or they're having issues with their mental health or they're having issues with like substance abuse or whatever, that they're not going to want to say anything about it.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to suddenly get a reputation of like, oh man, I'm going to start getting, like, I could get fired from this tour.
Right.
If I open up and say this, like, you know, that might freak people out and they might boot me off the tour, and then other people, if the management company gets word of it, they'd be reluctant to hire me again for these other acts or whatever. You know, like, there's a lot of, you know, I think people could be like worried about the repercussions, and that's why it's so great that there's the emergence of somebody like the Roadie Clinic to say, no, look, we gotta be honest about this is like endemic to this industry and the kind of people that are in it, and so we need to like talk openly about it, you know, and not just you know, not be ignoring it or sweeping it under the rug, you know.
Right.
These altitude changes are like fucking with my ears.
Yeah.
I'm like keep trying to like get them to pop, and like one ear is like more blocked than the other one. You know, and I think also too, like, you know, historically, I mean, it's a stereotype at this point, obviously, but like it's because there is a certain history of like people who work in the touring industry. It's like there's, you know, drugs, or whether it's drugs or like sex addiction or whatever, or alcohol, like there's a lot of things around people in the touring industry, like on a daily basis, that sort of facilitates that. And so it's almost like being an alcoholic and working in a bar, you know, where it's just like, it's like right there in front of you all the time. Right. You know, so it isn't always a place that like really facilitates the best.
It's a very enabling environment.
Yeah. Yeah, so if a person's got a problem, it can enable making that problem worse to the point where a person can bottom out.
Yeah.
Or at best, even at its most neutral, it's just going to prevent the more casual problem from just even getting better, like, and getting away from it, you know? Right. It will kind of always allow people to maintain themselves, you know, maintain and facilitate their addictions, rather than like, you know, being able to address it and get away from them and get help, you know. I think also too that when new people come into the industry, if they're not privy to that kind of information, if they're not like really aware of the temptations and the problems that are out there, and if they see the artists or other people engaging in it, and like people are just like really indulging and partying a lot and whatever, it can be easy for a person who doesn't even necessarily have a problem to begin with to kind of still get on like a bad trajectory. Right. You know, I've certainly encountered people before who, you know, were going out on their first tour and didn't have touring experience, and like their vision of what they were going to do was the stereotype. Right. And so they just like, they're like, oh, this is going to be so rad, and I'm going to be out like chasing girls every night, I'm going to be like drinking every night, and I can, you know, get high every night and whatever, and, you know, and they're like, but the job is not getting done that they're hired to do. Right. You know, and then they find themselves getting fired, and then like they're totally devastated, and, you know, whatever, and, you know, it's I think people need to be very clear-eyed and need to have someone, you know, whether it's like a band member or a management company or somebody, has to explain to them, like, at the very beginning, like, hey, just so you know, like, what you probably think this is, it's not that. And if the band wants to do that, cool, but you've got a fucking job to do, you know? Exactly. And I don't know if it's true or if it's just like apocryphal or whatever, but like I've heard stories going back, way back, that, you know, that like, that even a huge bands like Kiss, like way back in like the 70s, that like they had sober crews, and that they were basically like in the band, despite all of the debauchery and whatever, but like the way that their crews were run, it was almost like until the last semi door is closed, no one smokes weed, no one fucking drinks, nothing. You know what I mean? It's like because you know, when you're setting off pyrotechnics, you don't want to accidentally blow Gene Simmons up.
Yeah.
You know, so you know, like I said, I don't know the actual veracity of that you know the truth of that or whatever, but I've certainly heard stories about that sort of thing, that where it was like made very clear. It's like, okay, yeah, this is cool, you're on this big world tour, and like, yeah, there's going to be a certain amount of partying and debauchery or whatever, but not until your actual work day is done.
Yeah.
You know, and then after that, you've got X amount of hours until bus call. Have fun, do what you want, but there will not be any drinking on the job, like when the band is on stage and stuff like that. There's just way too much at stake, you know.
But it's all too common.
Yeah.
See guys drinking on the job. I see guys drinking in the middle of the day in the production office.
Well, I mean, I look at a huge percentage of people who got into doing sound specifically, got into doing sound because it's like they were started out like in bars and small clubs, and it was like, to them, it was like a job where they're allowed to drink.
Right.
And smoke weed, like while they're at work, which is insane, because from like an insurance liability standpoint, like that's like bananas. Like you just can't, you can't have people drinking on the job, but it's pretty freaking normal, you know. And I think, you know, some people will be able to manage it enough that they can kind of still rise through the ranks and get into bigger, you know, start working in bigger clubs and bigger venues and get picked up on tours and work for production companies and things like that.
Yeah.
But then there's also a ton of people who are just going to remain at the bottom rung of the ladder because, you know, that's the fact that they want a job where they can drink and smoke weed on the job is going to be like kind of indicative of the fact that they're not real go-getters. Right. And they're not real ambitious people, and they're going to, you know, 10 years later they're probably still going to be doing sound in that same bar or whatever, you know. Like there's a certain demographic that will get stuck there. But then once people kind of get into the touring world, if they're already kind of used to that from like being in the club world, then it's like, at that point, are you really even going to be able to break them of that habit, you know? It's like, it might be kind of tough. But I also know, too, that these days, especially after the excesses of, like, the 80s and the 90s, that, you know, characterized the concert industry during those periods, there's still a lot of legacy artists who come from that era, who are now sober, and insist on having entirely sober crews. Because that stuff is not going to be present on the buses, you know, or in the backstage, or on the stage, or anything, you know. And I was never into that. I was like, when I was into the hardcore scene in the mid-80s, like I was into the whole straight edge thing and all that kind of stuff, you know. So when I started touring with bands in the 90s as a roadie, like part of the appeal for the bands is they're like, oh, this guy doesn't get fucked up. So like if we party a little bit, at least we know we have a sober driver. Like this guy's always going to be ready to drive at the end of the show, and it's cool. Like, and it wasn't even like I was like with bands that were like total ragers or anything like that, but they could still drink and have a beer and then not have to worry about that they're going to get pulled over and get a breathalyzer test, because it'd be like, oh, well, Paul's always sober, so he's always going to be able to drive. Like he's always got his, you know, he's always like on top of things, you know.
Right.
And that's, you know, that in that tiny niche world of punk rock bands, you know, in the wake of Green Day and The Offspring and those bands blowing up, the interest in the pop punk scene that kind of filtered over to even the club level acts that started suddenly doing better during that era of like 95, 96, you know, like the late 90s, you know, made it possible for bands to have like enough of a budget to like bring like a roadie out with them, you know. And so I was kind of like doing practically everything, you know. I'd be like the only crew person for some of these like van and trailer bands, you know.
Right.
But yeah, being sober was a big part of the appeal that kept getting people to offer me positions to do things with them. You were talking about the future of touring, or your future in the world of touring, and you were saying like, you're like, yeah, like where I'm at and my age and everything and other stuff I got going on in my life. You're like, I've probably got maybe another decade of like touring, another 10 years or whatever.
Yeah.
So then I was kind of surprised when I heard that you weren't directly touring. Like it's just like something I'd seen like on social media or something, I don't know, and I didn't really have the full picture, so I wasn't really sure. And then I was like, well, wait a minute, is he like completely off the road, or is he just like on a break from the Gary Clark Jr. gig, or like, I wasn't really, wasn't really sure where you were at.
Right.
In terms of like, but
well, it landed at Sound Image. We struck the deal so that if I got an offer, I could take it. So I'm not trapped there.
Right.
But the fact is, I feel like, my generation, we're starting to age out a little bit, and a lot of my resources and contacts in the industry are either no longer with us or have moved on, but it just seems like the way I was getting gigs in the past, those wells have dried up.
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah, less word of mouth and more like having to go out and hunt for stuff.
Yeah, but I put the feelers out and didn't get really anything back. I mean, I got a couple of things, a couple offers, but it wasn't enough money to make me leave home.
Yeah, or interesting enough.
Actually, they were interesting, and I would have done it if they would have hit the mark, but it was really low budge.
Yeah. Yeah, budgets and like trying to figure that stuff out is like, that's another like weird, tricky thing in this industry that I think doesn't really get talked about a lot, is like that it's not just about salaries and what salary will actually pay your bills. It's the fact that it's a lifestyle. So like the numbers have to not only make sense in terms of like, what you need to survive, but it also needs to make sense in the context of like, they're asking for you to be away from home and on the road for extended periods of time.
Right.
And fully committed to this thing. And that's it's a different equation than when you're negotiating a salary for a desk job where you're going to sleep in your own bed every night.
Right.
That's a different, complicated sort of thing. I know that for myself, when it comes to like even just like local gigs or whatever, it's like, yeah, money is important and there's a certain minimum bottom line for it to even make sense, or I'd rather just not even make any money that day. I'd rather just stay home,
right,
and have time off or whatever. But it's like, yeah, it's not just that it's money, it's also got to be like a certain, like I know enough people now that, there's people are always asking me like, oh, you should come work at this club, or you should like whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but it just would be a job. I would just be phoning it in. Like, I'm not passionate about the way I'm passionate about the bottom of the hill.
Right.
Or even a level of passion that I can bring just filling in once every 2 or 3 months at like Hop Monk Novato or Little Saint in Healdsburg or something like that. It's like, there's a certain level of like, people might ask me to do a certain gig, and I'd almost rather, like, there's times where I'd rather just do something for free. than actually take like a really low amount of money. And it's kind of there's a weird equation that goes into that, like for me personally. And obviously with like long-term dedicated stuff like touring, that's not like feasible. That's not possible to be like, oh, I'll do it, like I'll go out on the road for months with no salary. But I guess what I'm saying though is just that it all comes down to like how you total up the different columns in your head of like what's the most important, you know? It's like, oh, if you need me to do something, I'd rather just come in and just do it as a solid for a homie and like help you out and do it for free, and I don't really give a shit about the money. But I wouldn't want to be doing it and getting paid knowing I'm going to come in and do it like every week or every day or whatever. You know, it's like, you know.
Well, when I'm considering tours and negotiating, like the tour has to tick a majority of the boxes, and if it doesn't tick the boxes, then it's a non-starter for me.
Yeah.
You know. And you know, some of those boxes are like the basics, you know. There's some tours that try to pay you a different rate on travel days, or there's some tours that will not get everybody a room on overdrive days or whatever, days off on the bus. Like if you have to stop and let the driver rest for 8 hours, like they'll just get a couple of day rooms
for showers
instead of getting everyone a day room.
Yeah.
Like those are basics. Those are just like, to me, these are the basics. And you have to, and things like that tell me how the organization thinks about us.
Yeah.
Like they dehumanize us. They don't think that we deserve whatever, you know, the per diem that we're requesting. They don't think we deserve our own room on a day off. You know, they don't think we deserve our full salary or our full rate on a travel day, or you know, and the list goes on and on. But that tells me what kind of organization it is.
Yeah, it's indicative of other underlying problems.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if they can't even operate on a human level, like how are they going to do the other stuff? You know? And that's really important to me, is how are we going to be treated out there?
Yeah.
You know? And, you know, money's nice.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, it is the music business after all, so we are out here trying to make money.
Yeah, well, and like you said about varying rates and things like that, it's like what is not understood, or what is being missed in that, is it's like, it doesn't matter that we're not doing a show that day. Like, it's like, okay, I understand from like the management's perspective, they're like, well, we're not making any money that day because we're not doing a show, and so we have to like structure a different budget or whatever. And it's like, well, that's true, but I'm also not sleeping in my own bed every night.
Right.
And like, I'm still walking away from paying gigs I could have on any day of the week that I want them at home.
Right.
So there's an opportunity cost.
Yeah.
Like, I'm losing money every day that I'm out here, and I'm not getting paid what I should be getting paid.
Right.
I could be doing that at home. So it's like, that's the part where they don't, you know, like, where whether they understand that or not, or they're just trying to protect their own profits or whatever, you know, whatever the case may be. Like you said, it's more of like, it's like there's that certain initial checklist where you're like, okay, if it's not hitting these certain basics here, that's a really bad indicator of like, there's only going to be more warning flags up ahead.
Right.
You know, it's like, Like if if we're starting from there, it's going to get even rougher and bumpier as we go.
And you know,
so,
you can kind of like shuffle the prioritization of those checkboxes around, and you know, let's say it's an artist that you really like and you love the music, but they're only offering you, you know, they're offering you $500 less a week than what you initially asked for. You got to be able to weigh those things, you know. It's like,
yeah,
will I take a $500 hit a week? You know, like, is it worth losing this gig with an artist that I really love over $500 a week? Can we make it up somewhere else? You know what I mean?
yeah.
Conversely, like if it's an artist that doesn't inspire you, and the money better be really good.
Yeah, you have to be a bit more mercenary about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everybody, the how they weigh the value of all those different columns.
Yeah.
Of, you know, like, yeah, that's like it's a different equation for every person in every instance, really. I mean, I know I've certainly like made compromises before where it's like, well, you know, that's not exactly ideally what I would want from it, but it's like I'm actually going to get way more fulfillment from this other part of it that I think is like really cool.
Right.
And so I'm like, I'm still motivated to like bring 100%. I think probably the worst of all worlds though is when I've seen people who are just completely phoning it in, and they're like, this band isn't paying me shit, so like I don't really care or whatever. And it's like, well, but like if you don't even care, like you just shouldn't be here.
That,
you know, like that
reflects poorly on the individual.
That's what I mean. It's like you took the gig.
Yeah, you got paid. You're getting paid to do a job. You should do the job.
Yeah, don't complain about it after the fact. Like no one tricked you. It's like you didn't know, you know, that you're making X amount a week or whatever. It's like,
yeah, you chose.
You know, yeah, like you chose to be here. Like, you know, represent them the way you're supposed to represent them. I've certainly run into that over the years. You know, even as far back as when I was like working as a roadie for bands, you know, and I other people that were like teching for bands or whatever, and you know, and then in the world of sound, like seeing different people in different roles on tours where they're just like not even remotely trying and they don't care, and you're just like, man,
I hate seeing that.
Yeah, that sucks. Because I feel like, well, you know what, there's somebody out there who probably would, you know, give their right arm to have this job. You know, even though you think the pay sucks, there's someone out there who would probably be really happy to be doing this and wants the experience and wants to cut their teeth. And I feel like you're actually preventing a more eager person from filling this role. Like it's, you know, so it's like unethical on multiple levels. Right. That you're not delivering, because you're not delivering ethically for the person that's paying you, and you're also depriving someone else who could be doing a way better job and like keeping them out of the role. Like that sucks. Yeah, and I mean, but that's, of course, that's nothing that's exclusive to the touring concert industry. That could, you know, that sort of stuff can be found in every sector. Right. Where there's just lazy people who are phoning it in, and they have like their justification for why they're doing subpar work or whatever. And then another thing I'm curious about too, when you toured with bands over the years, how much stuff were you typically using? Because like you started out touring like through like production companies that like landed a contract to do like a tour and like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But were there ever like on the smaller level when it was like van and trailer stuff, with what your standards are and the tools you like to work with and the things that you like to utilize, you know, did you find yourself, okay, well, this band doesn't have a packet, they don't have like a budget to like rent a PA and have a mic package and whatever, but did you still like, you'd be like, well, I'm still going to bring certain things of my own on the road, front of house racks and all that shit?
I brought my own personal racks out to several tours and didn't charge for them. Like, just because they were tools that I needed.
Yeah.
You know, it's part of the gig. Like I had an effects rack that I brought on every gig, and some inserts as well. And I didn't charge for them because it's what I needed. Those were my tools. This is like in my toolkit, you know. Nowadays I charge.
Yeah, after a certain number of things get broken, after a while you're kind of like, I can never replace the capsule in that mic now because they haven't made it for 40 years or whatever, and you're like, fuck, okay, if we ever take that on the road again, like, it needs to at least be making some money. Yeah, I know, I totally get that. Most of the touring I did, I was always carrying all my own mics because I always felt like, well, I don't know what console I'm going to have every day. There's just a certain number of things that I really don't have control over. But if I can at least have a certain caliber of mics, because like when I was starting out with like really small club bands, you know, you'd go someplace and it was like a handful of mics where, you know, it's like the 58 is like, you know, or the 57 is actually like omnidirectional because it has tape all the way around it. You know, like holding the plastic head on and whatever, you know, it's like
58
blocking.
smells like straight ass.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And it'd just be like, you know, shit was just completely like, everything's got rust and like broken and like held together with tape and whatever, you know. And even to the point of like, okay, fuck it, I'm buying all my own Atlas mic stands. And I'll put them in a big trunk and carry all my fucking mic stands because I got so tired of being in clubs where like every couple songs the singer's having to like put the boom back up and crank the thing down harder, and then finally it's just like so worn out it keeps sagging during every song that you go out there and you're like trying to like duct tape it in place, and it's like fuck, you know, like just like, okay, you know, I'm just gonna spend a couple $100 on my own, well, just on one stand with a lead vocalist or like whatever, you know, like because you get so tired of like dealing with shit that's all broken and beat up, you know. And then of course as you elevate and you go up the rungs of the ladder, like, you know, you're not going into venues where all the mic stands are like the shitty, cheapest bottom of the line ones that are falling apart, you know.
Right. And then the tours can afford to bring out packages, and you don't have to bring your personal out, or you can bring your personal out and charge them for it.
Yeah, you can be the one providing the actual rental package and everything. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's like the one bit of quality control that I could make consistent at least was, you know, well, and I was getting into doing sound like, you know, in 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like the, you know, like digital consoles were not ubiquitous yet. So I was still carrying like maybe like a 4-space or a 6-space rack that had a few inserts that I wanted.
Yeah.
You know, it was something I could still take on a plane in an overhead compartment or whatever.
Right.
And not take up much space in a trailer or whatever. And I would still encounter a lot of analog consoles and just had to have a little loom in the back, you know, so I could use things for inserts or my own EQ for the mains or something like that. But that was about the extent of it, was like mics, sometimes the mic stands, and then like a small front of house like insert rack or an EQ rack. And then the rest was just like whatever the PA is composed of, you know.
Yeah, I had a M1 and a D2. That was my effects rack.
Oh, okay.
And then I had a bunch of Aphex expressors.
Yeah, fucking amazing. We have a bunch of them at bottom of the hill.
Oh, you do?
But we have the 9000 series ones that go in the old DBX 900 rack.
Oh, yeah.
So it's the little, like the vertical module.
Yeah.
We have like 4 of those at bottom of the hill. And yeah, those things are like the fastest, like, so transparent. Like, those things are so great. I use them all the time.
I had like a rack of 6 of those.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then I had, what else did I have? Oh, what's it called? DPR 504.
Oh, like 4 or See, well, there was the BSS. There was like
it
the
was the
402.
It was the BSS 4-channel.
The compressor.
I had the 4-channel compressor with the de-esser, and then I had the 4-channel gate.
Okay. Yeah, I don't remember the model numbers, but I know what you're talking about. Like a lot of venues, like still have them. I know exactly what you're talking about. I think Dave Rat used those. They were like, I remember one time he was showing like, it was this video from like fucking ages ago. He had a video of his whole front of house racks for the Chili Peppers. And I think he had some of those BSS quad units in there.
Yeah.
That, yeah. I mean, it would change, of course. Like for me, from tour to tour, like if I was doing stuff for like a new band, then I'd be like, you know, like if I was at their rehearsals or whatever, I'd be like, I don't think I really need this. I think for what they're doing, I really need to bring this. You know, it's like sometimes it might be like I wanted a couple channels of gates for some particular reason, or different types of compressors or whatever. So it would the front of house racks would change a bit, you know, depending on what I was doing. And who I was with and that kind of thing. An hour to go. We were talking earlier about, and I was telling you about that thing that guy said to me at the House of Blues in Boston that one time about, he's like, you know, everybody I've you know, like his observation was everybody I've seen in the world of touring, they're all running from something. So having filed that away in my head like such a long time ago, I thought, okay, that's like a good closing question for when I interview roadies. Is like,
right.
If there were any truth to that, what are you running from?
If there were any truth to it.
Hypothetically, if.
Hypothetically speaking.
Asking for a friend.
Let's see. I mean, there was a time that I used touring as my escape from reality. And I was very successful at it. I was the king of compartmentalization. There was some pretty heavy things happening in my life, and you know, my dad wasn't doing so well. I was drinking a lot, and so I used touring as my way to create an entirely separate reality so that I could handle and cope with what was going on with my dad. And this is something that I haven't that I didn't realize at the time. You know, it was just that's what happened, you know. But you know, hindsight's 20/20, and after going through those times and then having time to reflect, it was pretty obvious looking back that I was abusing my privilege to be on the road for very selfish reasons. I'm surprised that I actually was able to sustain any type of professionalism at that time. Like, I can't believe no one kicked me off their tour. I was a wreck, you know. I wasn't doing well, and I didn't know how to reach out. And I think, you know, a lot of what we were doing as a crew, like, they probably just thought it, you know, I was just partying. And I was. Pretty hard.
Yeah, but that's not what it's about.
But that's not what it was about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, not to get too dark on you.
Yeah,
but,
no, it's good to know. I mean, these are the conversations I want to have with people. Like, you know, when I get a roadie in the passenger seat, like, this is the stuff, this is the good shit, you know, that people need to hear about.
Yeah. So, I think, does that answer the question?
Yeah. Well, yeah, like you said, it was kind of like an avoidance mechanism. It was
Totally.
like a way for you to like compartmentalize. I think it's probably like that's a really great word to explain it, you know. But yeah, you sort of like, without being deliberate, or like you're like unconsciously or subconsciously, you're constructing a bubble and constructing a world around yourself, you know, that allows you to be able to avoid coping with something that you just didn't have the tools to cope with at that time.
Yeah, exactly. I just created my own separate reality so that I could deal.
Yeah.
So I didn't know how to manage my emotions at that time.
And what like, how did you get past it? Like, what was that like, you know, when you have some clarity about it and you're like at a point where you're able to look back and realize, oh, that's kind of that's really the underlying basis of why I was doing what I was doing back then.
Yeah.
Was that during a period where you were taking a break from the road, or were you able to just have that realization once you were like still on the road but maybe out with a different camp of people? What facilitated the insight?
It was the next year, and I was out with a different camp, and that camp, there wasn't the degree of partying, and there was more there were deeper connections on a friendship level on that tour for me. So I was able to reach out and talk to my friends, and kind of they helped me process it. And
now, did any of that coincide with anything changing for your dad's situation?
So the year that I was talking about was 2013. He had been fighting cancer for a number of years. 2013 we thought was going to be his last year, and that's the year that I was pretty much I was not within the realm of reality. I was operating on a whole different level. He didn't pass in 2013, and then in 2014 I went to this other camp, or I was on this other tour, and one of the best tours I've been on. Some of the best, I made some of the best friends. You know, we're still best friends to this day on that tour, and as I was kind of working through that kind of ugly period that I wasn't so proud of, in 2014, my dad died while I was on tour.
Oh, fuck. Sorry.
And I had made a choice. This was what's crazy, is that I didn't think I had a choice to leave the tour. I thought that the tour would fucking come to a screeching halt without me. I honestly believed that nobody was going to be able to step in and take over my duties as monitor engineer. And so I said goodbye to my dad. I went to see him before we went to Australia, New Zealand. And I was like, okay, this was like November. And I said, okay, I'll see you at Christmas. And he didn't make it. He died a couple days after I left. And so I was in Australia, New Zealand, when I got the phone call. But it was crazy. It was like, you know, thinking that I didn't have a choice in whether, like, to prioritize my family. And I learned pretty quickly after that, like, I don't give a fuck what is happening on tour. If something's going down with my family, I'm gonna go be there for them. Like, you know, I learned it the hard way, but, you know. And so that was the end of 2014. I took and then I spiraled again in 2015. And then I ended up taking 2016 off, stayed home for 14 months. And I was still kind of a mess at that point too. But yeah, I should have taken some time off earlier, but you know, that's neither here or there at this point. Yeah, it was, those were crazy few years, because I thought I was at the top of my game. I was touring with some acts that I really admired and looked up to, and toured with one of my musical heroes, somebody who's had a huge influence on how I listen to music, and someone who's really inspiring in that time frame, and mixing it basically the highest level, but just being a fucking degenerate. Just like, what the fuck? Who is this guy? You know? But the tour was really enabling. Like, everybody was getting down. And there were some professional partiers on that bus. But yeah, those were some crazy times.
But that's kind of like midway through your career, like you kind of found yourself there, but you don't really feel like, because that's very much dictated by like tragic circumstances.
Right.
You know, and so I think that like anybody who's losing someone that important in their life,
yeah,
is gonna really, especially in the lifestyle of touring and being away from home,
yeah,
and like how like powerless that makes you feel, that you're not there by their side and everything.
right.
Like, I think that's gonna land especially hard on like any like decent person. But that was but you think that was like that era, that period was due to those circumstances, and it was like distinctly separate from anything that kind of got you into touring and stuff. Like there wasn't, like when you kind of got into all this, because it seems like it all happened really fast. That like you went to Full Sail and you got into doing audio, and then all of a sudden you're just like out on bus tours and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like, you didn't necessarily have like some crazy background of like the way that you grew up or anything that sort of like sent you kind of running off to join the circus or whatever necessarily.
No, not really. I just knew that I always wanted to be involved in rock and roll.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, if I wasn't going to be in a band, then I was going to find a way to be involved.
Okay.
I went to Full Sail with the intention of moving to LA and just producing records and winning Grammys.
Right.
That's all I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then I got this job at the sound company, and all those dreams just like faded away because I found live sound, and I was like, oh, okay, this is where it's at.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally understand.
I don't want to spend a week in the studio getting kick drum sounds.
Yeah, listening to like a dude flub the same guitar solo 50 takes in a row because he didn't practice before they came in, and like I learned the same thing in the late 90s. I was at a studio in Chicago for a couple of years, like as an assistant engineer, because I thought that was what I really wanted to do. I was like fascinated by music and electronics and how sound is like recorded and reproduced and the whole thing. And then like after a couple of years of being an assistant engineer, I was like, oh man, this is not what I want to do at all. This is definitely not what I want to do.
Yeah.
You know, like just like the tracking and overdubbing process just drove me crazy.
It's
I was
monotonous.
Not my jam.
No.
So I feel you on that.
I like festival changeovers.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's cool. That's definitely an interesting insight, and or multiple insights about, and I appreciate you sharing that story, because that's obviously like that's intense and it's personal and everything, and but that's the kind of stuff that's like the real meat of like the conversations I want to get to and like have with people like in this context of because there's good insight there, because I think there also too, like I was saying earlier off camera about how like I was like in my 50s when I started the Roadies and Rescues thing, and it's kind of like, okay, I've like, it took a half a century for me to finally have a fucking good idea. And like, for the one time in my life, I actually did something that was smart and like good for the world. It's like start saving these dogs and doing this kind of work, I'm not even the one who saves them, but you know what I mean? Like facilitating, like putting my limited skill set to use to help, these nonprofit organizations that are advocating for these dogs and driving them all over the West Coast and everything. And but it's interesting because so what I think is cool is that even though you had to go through that really difficult period and that difficult like traumatic experience of like losing your father in that way, and the path that it led you down, and like all of the avoidance and the drinking too much and all that kind of stuff, the arc of your career has had different points where at times you were running from something, but at times you were running towards something. Right. And that's like a thing that I learned very late in life, is that, people can be motivated by fear and they can be motivated by desire, and most people, their entire life is dictated by fear and avoidance of discomfort and pain. Right. So they spend all of their time running away from something that they can't face or can't deal with on some level. Right. Like that's just a part of the human condition that is like inherent to so many of us at various times throughout our life. So it's not even like an us versus them, like, I'm better, you're worse, or anything like that. It's just something that like all of us can get trapped in, like cycles where we're like running from something. It's only when you find something that's big enough and important enough and like motivating enough that you're like, okay, I'm not going to just keep running from things. Now I have something to run towards.
Right.
Now I'm driven by desire to want to like make something really cool happen, you know. And I spent the majority of my life, like a half a century, running from all sorts of like problems.
Yeah.
But you at least went into the career being like, oh, this is dope. Like, this is what I want to do.
Right.
I want to do live sound. This is cool. So you were running towards something. So at a much earlier age, you were clued in and a lot fucking smarter than I was because you were at least running in a direction that was motivating and a desire that you had.
Right.
You know, and then you came to a point, you came to a juncture where there was something you couldn't really, you didn't have like the tool set to deal with at that time.
Right.
And cope with. And so then becomes this like this period of like avoidance and like running from and like trying to reconstruct your reality in a way that ends up not being healthy and it's harming you in the long run and everything. But then you get through that period and then you get back to like, you get back in touch with who you really are, and you gain some like insight because it's facilitated by being around new people who like, give you the space and the time to like talk about it and figure it out.
Right.
And you grow and you mature, and you're like, okay, like now I understand that and I can put that behind me and now I can get back to running towards something again.
Right. Right.
You know? And that's great. That's like a really great thing. And it's I think a lot of times, I think it's probably more common that people have my experience where they're just avoiding and avoiding and avoiding. And then maybe like at some point we're lucky enough to have something that we want to start chasing after, you know? But yeah, I totally respect and appreciate you sharing that because it's like, it's cool to like see how that developed and how that happened and that you've had periods of your life and your career where you've been able to go both ways.
Right.
So that's very cool. And of course, for the viewer who's going to see this all stitched together later on, it'll be like, it physically got dark outside as we were talking about like a difficult, heavy topic. And it's like, because we've been like cutting this up and recording it like in, 20 or 30 minute segments over the course of several hours. And so the daylight keeps changing. And now it's like, it's dark enough and grainy enough that you can barely see us on these 2012 flip cameras with their very pixelated 1280p or whatever. But that's cool. I appreciate it. So thanks for sharing for that. And I'll just
you're welcome.
turn it off there.